I worked 2 jobs for 7 straight years to buy my own place, a high-rise unit I'd dreamed about since college, a space where I could finally breathe after burning myself out, building a life on my own. But at the family barbecue I hosted to celebrate my brother's engagement, my dad tapped his fork against a plate and said, right in front of everyone, "Your house is your brother's property now after his wedding." My mom added, "And if you don't like it, sweetheart, you can move back home." I stood there holding a tray of grilled vegetables, heat rising from the grill and from my face, while their realtor walked through my backyard like she already owned the place. That was the 3 seconds where my life split in two, the girl who kept quiet and the woman who finally couldn't. It started as something harmless. I wanted a simple get-together. Nothing fancy, just my family, some cousins, my brother Eric, his fiancée Jenna, and a couple neighbors who'd become friends over the years. I'd planned the layout a week before folding tables, coolers, the built-in grill I'd saved 3 months to buy. It felt good to host something in a place that belonged to me. I'd earned that. Before everyone arrived, I wiped down the counters inside, checked the dessert trays I'd bought from the cafe where I worked mornings, and straightened the tiny vase of daisies on the patio table. Small touches, but they mattered. Seabrook Hills Residences wasn't cheap, and sometimes the only way I believed I truly lived there was by caring for every inch of it. Around noon, my dad and mom walked into the backyard like they'd stepped onto a stage. Frank Carter always led the way, broad shoulders, stiff posture, the kind of man who thought authority came with being the loudest in the room. My mom, Linda, followed behind him with a soft smile that rarely meant softness. "Elena, honey, are the burgers done yet?" My dad didn't wait for an answer before lifting the grill lid himself. "Give me 5 minutes," I said. "People are still arriving." Eric arrived next, my older brother, the golden child, before anyone ever used the phrase. He held Jenna's hand, and Jenna carried herself like someone who expected the world to follow her Pinterest wedding board. They looked happy, which made me happy, even if I knew that in every family photo, I would be the single daughter who focused on work too much. I checked the thermometer in the chicken and moved plates across the counter. For the first half hour, everything functioned the way normal family gatherings do, light teasing, catching up compliments on the seasoning I'd used. Then my mom clinked her wine glass. I remember the stillness that followed, the kind that makes time stretch. Everyone turned toward her. Even from behind the grill, I felt something shift. "We have exciting news today," she announced, smiling wide. "Frank and I have found the perfect way to give Eric and Jenna the wedding they deserve." People murmured congratulations, assuming she'd talk about some venue or a family gift. "We're giving them a down payment on their future, too," Dad added proudly. "We're finally using the family asset for something meaningful." I looked up. Family asset. There was no family asset. My parents didn't own anything bigger than their townhouse, and even that was still on a loan. Mom spread her arms toward my backyard. "The house." I stopped flipping the chicken. "This house," she repeated louder, as if the crowd had misunderstood. "We've decided it should go toward Eric and Jenna's future, so we're selling it." For a second, I thought she was joking. A bad joke, but still a joke. I half smiled and said, "Mom, this is my place." "What are you talking about?" Dad waved his hand dismissively. "Sweetheart, it's been in the family. Grandma helped you with the down payment. We let you live here alone all these years. But Eric is starting a family now." I froze. 7 years. 7 years working a morning barista shift and then driving across town for my project coordinator job. 7 years eating dollar store soups so I could save enough for a conventional loan. 7 years of overtime, of no vacations, of repairing my own car because a mechanic bill would kill my savings plan. And they called that letting me live here. Jenna clasped her hands together. "Your mom showed us the photos of the venue in Napa we're booking. It's incredible, and once the house sells, we'll have enough for the deposit and the down payment on our first home. Isn't that amazing?" Amazing. They were celebrating a plan that used my life's work like confetti. Before I could speak, my mom gestured to a woman standing discreetly near the patio door. "Elena, this is Emily Baxter from Harborview Realty. She'll handle the listing. We already talked to her." Emily stepped forward with a polite, professional smile. She didn't look like she wanted to be there. "Your parents said today was the perfect time to see the property," she said. "They mentioned the title situation was straightforward." The title situation, I repeated. Emily, the title is in my name. Her smile faltered just slightly, but years in the business taught her to keep it steady. I was told it was a family trust property, she said. I felt my blood drain. There is no trust. I bought this place myself. My mom snapped her fingers like she was brushing away a detail. Elena, don't be dramatic. Grandma's money started it. That makes it family money. Family money doesn't give you legal ownership, I said quietly, trying not to shake. Dad stepped forward. Eric is getting married. You're single. You don't need a whole condo. It's time to do the right thing. In the corner of the yard, 3 cousins nodded in agreement. Aunts whispered, the kind of judgment that comes wrapped in sympathy. I looked straight at my brother. Eric, did you know about this? He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. Mom said you'd be fine with it. You don't even use all the rooms. Rooms I worked 7 years to have. Rooms I dreamed of turning into a baking studio, a place where I could decompress and create something warm after long workdays. I swallowed. The grill smoke stung my eyes, but it wasn't the smoke making them burn. Emily, I said, don't leave. I need to go inside and get something. My dad scoffed. Don't make a scene. I walked past him. Inside my condo, every step echoed against the hardwood floors. I'd refinished myself one weekend with no help. I opened the drawer in my office and pulled out my deed mortgage statements, property tax receipts, everything I'd kept neatly organized because I'd always known deep down that someday I might need to prove I belonged somewhere. When I came back outside, my dad was showing Emily the yard like it was his. The landscaping is professionally done, he bragged. I did the landscapings, I said flatly, handing Emily the folder of documents. She flipped through it. Her eyes widened. This shows sole ownership under the name Elena Carter, she said, voice firmer than before. There's no trust. No co-owners. My mom clapped her hands sharply. Elena, stop this right now. You're embarrassing us. No, Emily said, turning to my parents. You can't sell a property you don't own. The entire yard went silent. And just like that, the barbecue meant to celebrate my brother's future became the day I realized I had to protect mine. I did not grow up in a household where my accomplishments were celebrated. They were acknowledged when convenient, ignored when inconvenient, and often twisted into obligations I supposedly owed. As I stood in my kitchen after the barbecue disaster, I could feel every memory rising in quiet waves, reminding me that what happened today was not sudden. It had been building for years. The first time I realized I was expected to carry more than my share, I was 12. Eric lost his backpack on a field trip because he left it on the bus, and my parents turned to me and said, Elena, let him borrow yours until we buy a new one. I had saved allowance money for months for that backpack. I handed it over anyway, because back then I believed older siblings deserved more. My mother said, good girls share. I thought that meant I was good. The pattern only deepened through high school. When Eric wanted to join the basketball team senior year, he needed rides to morning practice. My parents worked early shifts and could not take him, so they drove me to the school parking lot at 5:30 in the morning and left me there. I sat with my backpack on my lap until school actually opened at 7. You are helping your brother succeed, my mother whispered, as if freezing in the dark was something to be proud of. By college, I understood my role. I was the steady one. The one who solved problems, the one who stretched to cover the gaps. Eric drifted through majors and jobs with applause for every new direction he tried. I worked 2 part-time jobs and still sent money home when my parents said they needed a little help. Whenever I hesitated, my father reminded me that families take care of each other. What he meant was, I took care of them. So when I graduated and moved out, I expected a quiet life, maybe stability. What I did not expect was to be working 7-day weeks, mornings at the cafe, evenings at the logistics firm, just to save enough for a future that felt like a finish line I might never reach. But I ran toward it anyway. I still remember the night I applied for the mortgage. I sat on my couch in a tiny rental studio, the kind with peeling paint and neighbors who screamed at each other through thin walls. I clicked submit with shaking hands. It took months of back and forth sending documents during lunch breaks explaining my income from 2 jobs, proving again and again that yes, I paid all my bills myself. When the approval came through, I cried so hard I could not see the screen. My parents never asked how I did it. They only said, "You are lucky. Grandma helped you." Luck. That was the word they chose for the hardest chapter of my life. Now, leaning against my kitchen counter, I pulled in a slow breath. The smell of grilled food lingered from the backyard, but the house felt cold. I could still hear murmurs outside, my parents justifying themselves, relatives agreeing, some whispering that I always took things personally. I wondered if they ever truly saw me, or if they only saw the version of me they preferred. I stepped into the hallway and glanced at the framed photo I kept on the console table. It was me at 24, holding the keys to this condo, smiling like someone who believed her struggles were finally over. I wanted to reach into that picture and warn her that the hardest part of owning something was not the mortgage. It was defending it from people who thought it belonged to them. The sliding door opened slowly. Eric walked in without waiting for permission. "We need to talk," he said. I did not move. "Do we?" "Yes. Look, I know you are mad, but you are making a huge deal out of this. Mom and Dad were trying to help everyone. You are blowing it out of proportion." I stared at him. "They told a realtor they were selling my home." He exhaled dramatically. "Because they thought you would agree. They said you always do." That sentence hit me harder than anything he had said at the barbecue, that I always agreed, that they counted on it, that my compliance was not just history, it was expectation. I crossed my arms. "So it did not occur to anyone that I might not want to give up the one thing I built on my own?" He shrugged. "You live alone. You do not even use the second bedroom. I have plans for that room." "Plans," he repeated as if the word sounded childish. "Elena, you are almost 30. Do you want to live your whole life in a condo meant for one person? While Jenna and I are trying to start our family." I laughed once, humorless. "So, my single life is less valuable. I do not deserve space unless a man is involved." He looked genuinely confused. "That is not what I said. That is exactly what you said." He rubbed his temples. "Look, Mom said Grandma's money went to you, and that means it is technically family money." I felt anger swirl in my chest. Grandma left that money to me, in her will, with my name on it, in writing. It was not family money. He rolled his eyes. "You are being too literal." "Literal is how legal documents work, Eric." He had no answer to that. He glanced toward the door where my mother hovered just out of sight. "Elena," he said softer, "now, you have always been the reasonable one, the one who helps, the one who understands the bigger picture. I am asking you, even if you are mad, to think of the family." I stared at him for a long moment, then asked the one question none of them expected. "When did any of you think of me?" He blinked. "When I needed help with school transportation," I asked. "When I worked 7 years without a break, when I fell asleep at the cafe counter because I was exhausted from the night shift, when I had to choose between groceries and saving for a down payment, when I bought this place alone and not one of you said congratulations." His expression tightened. "We supported you." "No," I said calmly. "You benefited from me. There is a difference." My mother stepped inside, then unable to stay quiet any longer. "Elena, stop. Families do things for each other without keeping score." "Then why do I owe everything and Eric owes nothing?" I asked. Silence. The first real silence of the day. My mother looked away. My father entered behind her, chin lifted like he was preparing for a fight he expected to win. "This attitude will not get you far," he said. "I already made it farther than you think," I replied. "And I did it without taking anything from anyone." My father opened his mouth to argue, but at that moment someone cleared their throat near the front door. Marcus stood there holding a small plastic container. "I brought that sugar," he said casually, even though we both knew he was not here for baking supplies. "Thought you might need it." My father frowned. "And who are you?" "Her neighbor," Marcus said, "and someone who thinks she has handled this entire situation more respectfully than any of you." The room stiffened. My mother bristled. Eric looked away. My father glared at Marcus like he had invaded enemy territory. I took the container from Marcus. "Thank you." Marcus nodded once, then said to my parents and brother, "She works harder than any of you realize. She earned this place, and she does not owe you her life just because you think she does." My father scoffed. "This is a family matter." Marcus shrugged. "Families do not get to rewrite property law." I bit the inside of my cheek to stop myself from smiling. My parents backed away slightly, not because they agreed, but because they did not know how to respond. They had been confronted with something unfamiliar, someone protecting me. After they left the kitchen, I leaned back against the counter again. Marcus stayed a few feet away, giving me space. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I am somewhere between furious and relieved," I said. "That sounds about right." He paused. "If you ever need help documenting anything, texts, conversations, whatever, I am around. I have been through something similar with my own family." He hesitated. "People take advantage of the child who shows up. They always do." I nodded slowly. His words settled deep inside me. When he left, I closed the door gently. The condo went quiet, a clean and heavy quiet, the kind that follows a storm but still carries the scent of rain. I walked into the second bedroom, the one Eric said I did not need. Sunlight spilled across the boxes of baking supplies I kept stacked near the window. I touched the unopened stand mixer I bought on sale last winter, the one I planned to use when I finally found time to focus on baking again. I whispered almost to myself, "This room has a future." And so do I. And for the first time in years, I knew that the future belonged to me and no one else. The next morning should have been peaceful. It should have been one of those calm Sundays I used to fantasize about during my double shifts, where the sun rose slowly through my kitchen window and I could brew coffee without rushing to drink it before work. For a few minutes, I let myself believe I would have that morning. I padded across the hardwood floor, barefoot, hair messy, oversized t-shirt hanging off one shoulder, and I thought, this is the life I built. Then my phone began ringing. At first I assumed it was Marcus, maybe checking in after last night's chaos. But when I saw my mother's name flash across the screen, I knew the piece had officially expired. I let the call go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, she called again. I answered not out of desire, but because I knew my mother. If I did not pick up, she would call until the phone overheated. "Elena," she said sharply, "the moment I answered, your father and I have been talking. We need you to come over." "No," I said simply. She sucked in a breath as if I had slapped her. "Excuse me," I said. "No, I am not coming over." "Elena, stop being dramatic. We need to discuss the house." "Mom, there is nothing to discuss. It is my house. You do not have ownership. You do not have rights, and you will not sell it." "You are being selfish," she snapped. "Eric and Jenna need stability. So do I." "You are single," she said, her voice steely. "You do not need a whole home for yourself." I closed my eyes. "Stop using my relationship status as a financial argument. It is not an argument. It is common sense." "No," I said, "it is an entitlement." She went silent for a long second. Then, in a voice dripping with wounded authority, she said, "Your father and I gave you that down payment." "Grandma gave it," I corrected. "We decided how it was used," she said. "That makes it a family resource, and family resources help the family." "Mom," I said calmly, "if you call it family money one more time, I am hanging up. You do not talk to me that way. Then stop treating me like an asset." My mother exhaled sharply, and for a moment, her facade cracked. "Your father is furious," she whispered. "He says you embarrassed him yesterday." I almost laughed. "He embarrassed himself by trying to sell a house he does not own." "You are twisting the narrative," she hissed. "No," I replied. "I am stating facts." She made a pained noise somewhere between a sigh and a scoff. "Fine," she said bitterly. "If that is how you want to be, then you are leaving us no choice." My stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" Her voice turned cold, controlled, as if she had rehearsed this part. "We spoke to a lawyer this morning." I froze. "And we are initiating a claim that your down payment was misused family inheritance. If a judge agrees, the house may revert to the family trust." My hand tightened around the phone. My pulse thudded in my ears. "You would actually do that?" I whispered. "It is the only way to protect what your grandmother intended." "No," I said slowly. "It is the only way to get what you want." She ignored that. "We are meeting with the lawyer tomorrow. You can either sign over partial ownership voluntarily, or we will proceed." A heavy, icy calm slid over me. Then proceed, I said. Elena, I am done being bullied. Do whatever you want. You will regret this, she said coldly. Maybe, I replied, but not as much as I will regret letting you dictate my life forever. She hung up first. I stood in my silent kitchen for several seconds before my legs finally moved. I sank into a dining chair and stared at my hands. They were trembling, but I did not feel fear. I felt validation. This was exactly why boundaries existed, and exactly why my mother hated them. A text popped up on my phone. Eric, Mom says you refuse to cooperate again. Why are you being like this? I did not respond. Another text followed. Eric, you are ruining everything. Jenna is crying. This wedding is supposed to be our new beginning. Still, I stayed silent. Then my father texted. Dad, your mother is distressed. Fix this. Come over by noon. That one made me laugh, not happily, but bitterly. Fix this. Like I had broken something. Like my only role was to repair the consequences of other people's actions. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Marcus, I answered. You okay? He asked. No, I said honestly. Want company? I hesitated. I do not want to drag you into this. Elena, he said softly, you are not dragging me. I am volunteering. That nearly broke me. Okay, I whispered. Yeah, come over. When I opened the door for him 20 minutes later, he held 2 coffees, a paper bag of pastries, and a concerned expression. You look like you need sugar, he said. I need a lobotomy, I muttered. He set everything on the counter and leaned against it, arms crossed. Tell me what happened. So I told him. Every word, every threat, every manipulation, every sentence sharpened by years of practiced guilt. He listened without interrupting, without offering solutions too early, without minimizing anything. When I finished, he shook his head slowly. They want you to surrender because they think you are the same version of Elena who gave away her backpack. I blinked. What? You told me once. You said when you were 12 you gave your brother your new backpack because your parents said good girls share. I stared at him. They still think that girl lives here, he said, that if they push hard enough she will come out again. He paused, then added, but she does not live here anymore. For a moment my throat tightened. Then he said something that shifted everything. You need a lawyer. I exhaled. I know. I can recommend someone. She handled my uncle's estate dispute. She does not get intimidated, and she is very good at shutting entitled people down. Does she handle situations like this? Family property disputes? Absolutely. I rubbed my hands together. I never wanted it to get this far. Of course you did not, Marcus said gently, because you are reasonable, but your parents are counting on that to gain control. If you do not fight this, they will keep pushing until they own everything you built. I swallowed. He was right. I knew he was right, but hearing it aloud shook something loose inside me. I will call her, I said. I can text her for you, he offered. Tell her you need an appointment today. You think she will agree? For you? Yes. I gave a small laugh. Why? Because you are not wrong. And she loves cases where the client is clearly being taken advantage of. He meant it. I could tell. He sent the text. Within 10 minutes he received a reply. She can see you at 3, he said. Her office is downtown. I can drive you if you want. I can go alone, I said, though part of me wanted him there. I will follow you, he said anyway, just in case you need backup. I did not argue. At 2:45, I found myself standing outside the law office, heart pounding but firm. Marcus leaned against his car across the parking lot, giving me a steady nod. I pushed the door open. Because I was done being quiet, done being manipulated, done letting anyone twist my life into something convenient for them. This chapter of my life would not be written by my parents. It would be written by me. The lobby of the law office was quiet enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. The walls were lined with framed certificates and soft lighting that made everything feel more serious than I was prepared for. I checked in with the receptionist, then sat in a leather chair that tried too hard to feel comforting. My foot tapped uncontrollably. My palms were damp. My mind replayed every word my mother had said that morning, each one tightening around my ribs like a rope. Elena Carter. I looked up. A tall woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a confident walk, stood in the doorway. She wore a navy suit and carried a folder tucked under her arm like it was an extension of her spine. "I am attorney Celeste Walker," she said. "Let us talk." Her office was all clean lines and sunlight. I sat across from her at a polished wooden table, a box of tissues discreetly placed to my right. She opened her folder, clicked her pen, and nodded for me to begin. I told her everything. I told her about the 7 years I worked 2 jobs. I told her about the down payment from my grandmother that my parents never contributed to. I told her about the mortgage I paid alone, the renovations I did myself the nights I worked overtime until I could barely stand, but forced myself to keep saving. I told her about the barbecue ambush my family announcing the house sale like it was Sunday brunch gossip. I told her about my mother's threat to challenge ownership. Celeste listened without interrupting, her expression unwavering. When I finally finished, she settled back and folded her hands. "Well," she said calmly, "that was entirely illegal." I blinked. All of it. Almost everything your parents did falls under attempted property fraud, misrepresentation, and coercion. The listing agreement they signed, that is a massive liability for them, not you. The breath I had been holding finally escaped. Hearing the word illegal applied so plainly to their actions was a shock, a painful validation of the betrayal I had suspected all along. My anger, once a dizzying whirlwind, began to sharpen into focus. "But they said they talked to a lawyer," I whispered. Celeste gave a small, almost amused exhale. "Then the lawyer must not have seen your deed." She opened her folder, revealing the copy I had emailed her that morning. "Elena, this home is listed under your name and your name only. Not a trust, not a shared title, not jointly inherited property. Your parents have 0 legal standing." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in like warm water. Celeste continued, her voice steady. "Your parents can claim whatever they want verbally, but there is no court in the United States that will grant them ownership of property they never paid for, never co-signed on, and were never granted rights to." I felt something loosen in my chest. "But they said my grandmother's gift makes it a family inheritance." Celeste shook her head decisively. "A gift is a gift. The moment your grandmother signed that check to you, it became yours. Unless she explicitly stated in writing that it must remain a family-controlled asset, no one else has a legal claim." I swallowed hard. "They said they could challenge the down payment as misused inheritance." "They can try," she said. "They will lose." I almost laughed. "They will not believe that. That," Celeste replied, "is not your problem." She flipped a page. "Now, you mentioned the realtor who showed up at your barbecue." "Yes," I said. "Her name was Cameron Hughes." "Good," she nodded. "I know her. Excellent reputation. Thorough. She will not want her license jeopardized." "What happens next?" I asked quietly. "Next," Celeste said, "we call her." She dialed immediately, putting the call on speaker. It rang twice before a professional voice answered. "This is Cameron." "Cameron, this is attorney Celeste Walker. I have your client here, Elena Carter." There was a sharp inhale on the other end. "Elena, I am so glad you reached out. I owe you an apology. I had no idea." "You are not at fault," Celeste cut in. "Elena tells me you voided the listing agreement." "Immediately," Cameron said, firm. "I told my broker the moment I saw her deed. Your parents misrepresented ownership. They told me it was family trust property and they were the authorized sellers. They even insisted the deed was outdated and that updated documents were being processed." My blood ran cold. "They said that," "Yes," Cameron replied. "And they tried to schedule a photographer without verifying anything. It raised suspicions, but the trust story made sense at first." "It does not anymore," Celeste said. "We will need a written statement from you acknowledging misrepresentation occurred." "You will have it today," Cameron replied. And Elena, "Yes, I am really sorry. Your parents tried to put me in the middle of something that could have cost me my career." "I know," I said quietly. "I am sorry they lied to you." Cameron exhaled. "If there is anything I can do to help you legally, I will. Your parents were absolutely in the wrong." "We will be in touch," Celeste said. They hung up. I stared at the desk muscles vibrating with adrenaline. "They are really trying to bulldoze me," I whispered. "They expected you to roll over," Celeste said. But you drove here instead." I nodded. Now she continued. "We need to get ahead of whatever their next move may be. You said they mentioned meeting with a lawyer tomorrow." "Yes." "Good. Let them meet. The lawyer will tell them the same thing I told you, assuming they give the truth. But I doubt they will." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Have you met my mother?" Celeste smiled gently. "I have met her type." She slid a paper across the desk. "This is a cease and desist notice. I want you to send this to your parents after you leave." My heart jumped. "A legal notice?" "Yes. It warns them to stop all attempts to sell, claim, or interfere with your property. It also documents the threat to challenge ownership. From here on out, everything goes on record. They will understand very quickly that you are not playing games." I stared at the paper. My name, their names, the bold legal wording, the firm's letterhead. Something about seeing it printed made it real. I felt a terrifying jolt of power. This document wasn't just a paper threat. It was a shield transforming my quiet desperation into a defined legal boundary. "What happens if they ignore it?" I asked. "Then we escalate," Celeste said, "which includes restraining orders if necessary." I flinched. I do not want it to get that ugly. She leaned forward, her voice softening. "Elena, listen. People like your parents only stop when consequences become more uncomfortable than their entitlement. If they push you, hold the line." My throat tightened. "I am scared." "Of your parents?" she asked. "No," I said. "Of losing who I am trying to become." Celeste gave me a look that was equal parts warmth and strength. "You will not lose her," she said. "You are becoming her." A tear slipped down my cheek, and for once I did not apologize for it. When I left the office, Marcus was still waiting in the parking lot. He walked up to me immediately. "How did it go?" I handed him the envelope Celeste had given me. "This," I said, voice trembling but steady, "is the beginning." He looked at the stamped letter. "A cease and desist." "Yes." He pressed a hand to my shoulder. "I am proud of you." I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with the cool, clean certainty of a weapon I now knew how to wield. I realized I had walked into Celeste's office feeling small and left with my true stature. "Marcus, I said this is going to blow up." "Then let it," he replied. "Sometimes things need to explode before they can be rebuilt the right way." The wind swept through the parking lot, cool and salty from the nearby coast, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to relief, maybe even hope, because the next battle was coming. But this time, I was not walking into it unarmed. I stood inside my apartment, the cease and desist letter still warm in my hand, and felt the familiar heaviness creep into my chest. It was the same weight I had carried since I was a teenager, the same pressure that told me I owed my family more than myself. I set the letter on the kitchen counter and walked to the window overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered under the late afternoon sun, but I barely saw it. All I could see was the past rushing toward me like a wave I had tried for years to outrun. I pressed my forehead lightly against the glass and let the memories come. It always started with the same moment. I was 16 when my father first said, "You should be grateful you have a home. Not everyone is as fortunate as you." At the time, it was because I had wanted to join an after-school baking class that cost too much money. The answer had been a firm no, and guilt had been the explanation. I learned early that desire was selfish, that comfort was indulgent, that having my own dreams meant I was somehow ungrateful for what I already had. My family liked gratitude only when it was convenient for them. The next memory followed quickly, as if my mind had been waiting for an excuse to unbox everything I had buried. At 18, I got my first job at a grocery store. I planned to save for a community college course. My mother sat me down in the living room and said, "Your brother needs new soccer equipment. You can help with that, right? We are a family. We support each other." When I hesitated, she frowned as if I had offended her personally. So I bought the equipment. I paid half my weekly income to do it. Eric thanked me once and never thought about it again. By 19, I was working 2 part-time jobs while attending classes. My parents asked me to contribute to household costs, even though they had never asked Eric, even when he worked full-time at a car wash. "He is a boy," my father had said. "He will have a family one day. You do not need much." There it was again. That word, need. As if girls were meant to survive on scraps while boys were prepared for kingdoms. The past tightened around my throat as I remembered the worst part, the one I never said aloud. When I was 21, I got a small scholarship for a culinary program. It was the first time I had felt chosen for something. I had cried in the parking lot, holding the acceptance letter, imagining the life I could build around what I loved. I had pictures in my head of standing in a kitchen that belonged to me, making food that comforted people the way food had once comforted me. My mother took the letter from my hand when I got home. "That is cute," she said. "But your brother wants to go on a trip with his friends. He needs help with flights. You can defer this thing. You can always go later." I remember the moment exactly. The hallway carpet had a loose thread I picked at while she spoke. The air smelled like her perfume. My throat felt thick. I said nothing. I folded. Again. Eric went on his trip. I stayed home. The scholarship expired. My dreams shrank into a box I pushed under my bed. That was the version of me they expected to see forever. The girl who bent. The girl who waited her turn. The girl who gave up pieces of herself until she barely existed. Now I understood why the barbecue had felt like a final blow. It was not just about the property. It was about the accumulation of every year they had taken from me, every boundary they crossed, every time they assumed my dreams were optional. My parents did not just threaten my home. They threatened the version of myself I had been fighting desperately to rebuild. A soft knock pulled me out of my spiral. I opened the door and found Kayla standing there with a bag of groceries and her hair in a messy bun. "I brought snacks," she said. "You look like you need them." I stepped aside without a word. She walked to the kitchen like she lived here and began unpacking fruit crackers and a container of dark chocolate almonds. "You have that look," she said. "I have been thinking about everything I have ever suffered from." I sat on the island and rubbed my eyes. I cannot stop replaying the past. Of course you cannot. That is what trauma does. It keeps receipts. I laughed, but it was small and sad. Kayla sliced an apple and slid the plate toward me. "Tell me what came up." I hesitated only a second before the words poured out. The memories, the sacrifices, the dream I lost at 21, the countless times my parents made me feel like wanting anything was selfish. When I finished, Kayla's eyes were soft but sharp with anger. "Elena," she said quietly, "your parents have been emotionally draining you for years. The barbecue was not the beginning. It was the tipping point. I know I said. I keep asking myself why I let it go on for so long. Because you were conditioned to. Because you were taught to be small. But you are not small anymore." I swallowed hard. "They still think they own me. They think they own your compliance," she corrected. "Your silence and your guilt." The house was just the next thing they wanted to claim. Her words hit me in the chest. Kayla reached across the counter and took my hand. "You are doing the right thing. You are allowed to defend what is yours. You are allowed to keep what you built." My voice cracked when I whispered, "I am scared that if I fight, I will lose my family forever." Kayla squeezed my fingers. "And if you do not fight, you will lose yourself." A tear escaped before I could stop it. She stood and wrapped her arms around me. I leaned into her and let myself cry, not the heartbreak of a daughter losing her parents, but the grief of a woman realizing she had been raised to disappear. When I pulled back, Kayla wiped my cheek with her sleeve. "You needed that," she said. I nodded. "I did." Now she said, "Sit up straight and tell me what your lawyer said." I took a breath. She said I have every legal right to keep my property. She said my parents have no claim. She said the listing agreement they signed is a liability for them, and she made me send a cease and desist. Kayla's eyebrow shot up. "Good. They will freak out, but good. I know things are about to get ugly. They have been ugly for years," she said. "The difference is now you are not pretending the mess is normal." I sighed and glanced at the letter on the counter. I wish I could skip the part where they explode. "You cannot," Kayla said, "but you can prepare for it." "How?" She smiled. "By remembering that you are not the powerless girl they raised. You are the woman who survived burnout, saved for 7 years, worked 2 jobs, and bought her own luxury apartment in an expensive coastal city. You did that alone. That is who you are." Her words steadied me in a way my own thoughts never could. I stood and walked back to the window. The city lights were brighter now, scattering across the buildings like tiny victories. I placed my hand on the glass, feeling the cool surface under my fingertips. This was my home, my sanctuary, my beginning. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to protect myself, even if the people I had to protect myself from were my own family. Behind me, Kayla said gently, "So what is next?" I turned toward her. "Next," I said, I stopped looking backward. I woke up before sunrise, the kind of early morning where the world feels muted as if everything is holding its breath. My apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I sat on the edge of my bed, my phone still resting in my hand from the night before. There were no new messages from my parents, no missed calls, no furious paragraphs demanding explanations. The silence felt unnatural, thick, calculated. I knew it was not peace. It was pressure. It was the pause they always took before they came back harder. I walked into the kitchen and made coffee, the rich smell grounding me. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and leaned against the counter, staring at the cease and desist letter that still sat where I had left it. Sending it had been necessary and terrifying. Every second since clicking send, I had waited for their response, but nothing came. I checked the clock. 6:18 in the morning. I knew they had seen it. My parents were the kind of people who woke up early every day, regardless of circumstance. They would have read the letter before the sun came up. They would have talked about it at their kitchen table, voices low but sharp, blaming me, justifying themselves, rewriting the narrative to make my boundaries feel like betrayal. I tried to shake off the heaviness and focus on work. My laptop sat open on the dining table where I left it the night before, spreadsheets glowing against the screen. I logged in and attempted to lose myself in project timelines and vendor schedules, but my head kept drifting. Every few minutes I looked at my phone, waiting for it to light up. It stayed still. By mid-morning, my jaw hurt from clenching it so tightly. Around 11, the first message came. Not from my mother, from Aunt Susan. "Elena, call me. We need to discuss the letter you sent your parents." I stared at the text, the familiar mix of irritation and dread curling in my stomach. Aunt Susan had always been my mother's second voice, the echo that repeated whatever judgment or guilt my parents wanted to deliver. She had never asked me how I was doing, never asked about my job, my dreams, or my life, but she always had something to say when I pushed back against the family narrative. I placed the phone face down and let out a shaky breath. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. Aunt Susan again. I let it go to voicemail. Then a text. "Elena, this is immature. Your parents are devastated. Devastated." The word made me laugh even though nothing was funny. They tried to sell my apartment and they were devastated. I silenced my phone and returned to work. At 12:30, Kayla texted, checking in. "How are you holding up?" I hesitated, then typed, "They are being quiet." "Too quiet," she replied instantly. "That means they are plotting." I stared at her message and exhaled. "I know. Stay strong. Silence is a tactic." She was right. It always has been. When I was younger, their silence scared me more than their yelling. Silence meant decisions were being made without me, plans being formed, punishments being crafted. Conversations I was not welcome in took place behind closed doors. By mid-afternoon, the messages escalated. First, Aunt Susan again. "Your parents do not deserve this disrespect." Then my cousin Melissa. "Your mom is crying. Was the legal letter necessary?" Then my brother finally. "What did you do?" "They are freaking out." I read each message slowly, letting the manipulation soak in so I could recognize it for what it was. None of them asked what happened. None of them asked about the truth. None of them asked how I felt. They only wanted me to apologize for protecting what was mine. I put my phone down, but it buzzed again almost immediately. This time it was a voicemail from my mother. I hesitated before pressing play. "Elena." She started, her voice thick with the kind of sadness she wielded like a weapon. "We received your letter. I cannot believe you would do something like this to us. After everything we have sacrificed for you, after everything we have done, you should be ashamed. Your father is hurt, your brother is confused, and your grandmother would be so disappointed to know you used her gift to attack us." I froze. My grandmother would have never sided with them. My grandmother had been the only person in my family who saw me, who understood me, who encouraged me. She had been the one who told me independence is never selfish. She had left me the down payment because she believed I deserved something of my own, and now my mother was twisting that memory into a weapon. The voicemail continued, "We will not engage with your threats. If you want to talk, call us when you are ready to be reasonable." The message ended. I stood there, the phone in my hand, feeling anger rise like heat from my spine. Not loud anger, cold anger, controlled anger, the kind that builds strength instead of diminishing it. My parents were not devastated. They had run out of room to maneuver. There was no misunderstanding, only outrage. What unsettled them most was realizing they no longer dictated the terms. At 4:15, there was a knock at my door. For a moment, my heart stopped. I approached cautiously and looked through the peephole. It was Marcus. I opened the door. "You scared me." He stepped inside, his face serious, holding a stack of envelopes in one hand. "Sorry, your parents went to my house." My stomach dropped. "They showed up unannounced," he said, closing the door behind him. "They wanted to talk to you. When they realized you were not there, they decided to talk to me." I sank onto the couch, dread settling in my bones. "What did they say?" He set the envelopes on the coffee table. "They brought printed copies of your cease and desist, highlighted, with notes written in the margins." I blinked. "Seriously?" "Yes. Your mother said you are being dramatic. She said you need to be reminded of your place in the family." "My place," I repeated quietly. Marcus nodded. "Then your father said you are overreacting, and that what they did was normal." "Normal," I whispered. "Trying to sell my apartment is normal. They also said Eric deserves the property more because he is starting a family one day." I laughed. It came out sharp and broken. "Of course he does." Marcus sat beside me. "There is more." I looked up. "Your mother said the only reason you are doing this is because of Kayla, that Kayla is filling your head with nonsense." I felt my jaw tighten again. "So now they are blaming my friends." And he added, "They plan to talk to their lawyer tomorrow. They want to know if they can accuse you of mishandling the inheritance." There it was, the escalation, the shift from guilt to attack. I covered my face with my hands and breathed slowly, trying to keep the panic from spiraling. Marcus touched my arm. "You are not alone in this." I lowered my hands. "I know, but it feels like everything is unraveling." "It is not unraveling," he said. "It is revealing." His words settled deep inside me. He was right. Silence was not peace, it was pressure, and now the cracks were beginning to show. I sat up straighter. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "I told them you have every right to protect what is yours," he said, "and that if they keep pushing, they will lose you." I stared at him, overwhelmed. He held my gaze. "Let them be loud. You stay solid." Outside, the sky darkened into early evening, the city lights beginning to flicker awake. My apartment was still, but inside me, something was shifting. The silence from my parents was not winning. It was breaking. And when it finally shattered, I knew I would be ready. The elevator doors slid open to the lobby with a soft chime, and my pulse kicked up the moment I stepped out. I had been summoned to Seabrook Hills Community Room by my building manager, Henry Wilson, who said there had been an incident. His tone had been tense, strained in a way that made my stomach twist. I walked down the hallway lined with framed coastal art and tried to steady my breathing, but the closer I got, the louder the voices became. I recognized my mother's voice first, high, sharp, dismissive, then my father's, low, forceful, irritated, and then a third voice, unfamiliar but authoritative. "Rebecca, the new realtor." I rounded the corner. My parents froze the moment they saw me. My mother stood in the middle of the community room like she owned it, her arms crossed, her expression carved from disappointment. My father hovered beside her, looking irritated and self-righteous, flipping through a packet of documents Rebecca had clearly given them. Papers were spread across the table. My parents' coats were draped over chairs like they planned to stay a long time. Henry stood near the wall watching the scene like he was trying not to intervene. and across from my parents, calm but visibly exhausted, stood Rebecca Madden, the realtor who had unknowingly stepped into my family's hurricane. My mother's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Elena." Finally. "We have been waiting." I stopped a few feet from them. "You were not invited here," my mother scoffed. "We do not need an invitation to see property that belongs to this family." "It does not belong to this family," I said, keeping my voice even. "It belongs to me." My father waved the papers in his hand. "We are here because of these lies, Elena. The nonsense in this letter you sent. A cease and desist against your own parents. You should be ashamed." I did not flinch this time. "I am not ashamed." My mother stepped forward, chin lifted. "You embarrassed us. You accused us of fraud." "Fraud, Elena. Your father could lose his job if anyone saw these accusations. You signed a listing agreement for a property you do not own," I said. "That is how the law defines fraud." My mother laughed tight and bitter. "There you go again, talking like a victim." Rebecca cleared her throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I showed you the title records this morning. Legally speaking—" "We did not come for a lecture," my father snapped. He turned to me. "We came for the truth." I felt something in me click into place. Not anger, not fear, something steadier. "What truth do you think you are missing?" I asked. My father gestured at the documents on the table. "You used your grandmother's inheritance for the down payment. That makes this a family inheritance issue, which means your mother and I have the legal right to challenge ownership." Rebecca straightened. "Actually, that is not accurate. Inheritance does not grant shared ownership unless specified in writing, which—" My mother held up a hand to silence her. "We already spoke to our lawyer. He said we can make a claim based on misuse of family resources." I swallowed hard. Family resources. She gave that money to me. Her will listed me as the beneficiary. You cannot twist that into family resources. My mother narrowed her eyes. "So you are calling your father a liar. I am calling him wrong," I said. The room went still. My mother's voice rose. "Ever since you moved into this place, you have acted like you are better than us, like your life is more important, like you are too good for your own family." "I bought this apartment with my own money," I said quietly. "I worked for it, and we supported you," my father snapped. "Do not forget that." My breath hitched. Supported me. The same claim they always made, the same myth they built their entitlement around. Before I could respond, Rebecca stepped in. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I think there has been a misunderstanding. You cannot sell this apartment. Elena is the sole legal owner. Your lawyer may not have been given the full picture, but I can assure you," my mother rounded on her, "you need to stay out of this." Rebecca did not move. "You brought me into this." My father jabbed a finger in her direction. "We hired you to help us sell this unit, and you are now taking her side." "You did not hire me," Rebecca said evenly. "You misled me." My mother scoffed. "You must be confused." Rebecca lifted a sheet of paper from the table. "This is the title record. It shows Elena Carter as the full owner. No trust, no shared rights, no co-ownership." My mother's face hardened. "We already know what it says. That does not mean it is correct. Titles can be amended." I stared at her. "Are you listening to yourself?" "We are listening to the truth," my father said. "And the truth is that this apartment was meant for the family, not just you." I felt my jaw tighten. "It was never meant for the family." "That is your interpretation," my mother said coldly. "No," I replied. "That is reality." For a moment there was silence. Then my mother's voice sharpened into the tone she used when she wanted to crush me into obedience. "Elena, who do you think you are to keep something this valuable from your own brother, from the family who raised you, from the people who sacrificed for you? Who are you to say you deserve this more than he does?" The question hit like a physical blow. Not because I did not know who I was, but because it was the question she had trained me to fear my entire life. "Who do you think you are?" I had been raised to keep my voice small, expected to pour myself out until nothing remained, taught to fold my needs beneath someone else's comfort, and shaped to believe that defending my own life was a rebellion. I felt my pulse thundering in my ears, but my voice came out steady. "I am the owner," I said. My mother blinked. I took a step forward. "I am the woman who worked double shifts for 7 years. I am the one who saved every cent. I am the one who paid every mortgage payment alone. I am the one who rebuilt myself after burnout. I am the one who bought this place. I am the one who signed for it. I am the one whose name is on that deed." My father's jaw tightened. I continued, heat rising in my chest. "You want to know who I think I am? I am the person who is done being used. I am the person who is done being guilted. I am the person who is done giving up everything so you can give Eric whatever he wants." My mother's face flushed with anger. "You are being dramatic." "No," I said. "I am being honest." My father pointed at me. "You are disrespecting us." "No," I said again. "I am defining boundaries." Rebecca let out a slow breath as if she had been waiting for me to say those words. Henry shifted, trying not to stare. My mother stepped closer, her voice low and venomous. "Elena, this apartment is not just yours. It will never just be yours. It belongs to the Carter family, and you need to accept that." I lifted my chin. "I do not accept that." Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "You will regret this." I did not move. "No. I will regret the years I spent letting you treat me like I owed you my life." For a moment, my mother looked stunned. Then something flickered across her face, rage, fear, disbelief, and finally realization. Realization that the daughter they used to control was gone. My father slammed the documents onto the table. "If you want a war, you will get one." My breath caught, but before I could respond, another voice cut in. "Rebecca, and if you go down that path, Mr. Carter, you need to know something." He glared at her. "What?" She held up the deed. "Legally, you will lose." For the first time all day, my parents had no response, just silence. It did not feel threatening now, it felt like fear. My parents stormed out of the community room chairs, scraping voices cracking with indignation, but their outrage lingered behind them like a sour aftertaste. I remained rooted to the floor, pulse hammering in my wrists and temples, my breath thin and uneven. The fluorescent lights felt harsher than usual, exposing every trembling inch of me. Rebecca approached first, her earlier firmness softening into concern. "Elena?" she said quietly. "No one should have to stand through that." I managed a nod, though my mind was still unraveling what had just occurred. Henry came next, shifting awkwardly as if unsure where to put his hands. "I do not know the whole story," he murmured, "but I am sorry they ambushed you here. This is supposed to be a home, not a battleground." A dry laugh escaped me before I could stop it. That was not even the battle I whispered, just the opening act. Rebecca and Henry exchanged a subtle, troubled look. "There is something else you should know," Rebecca said. A knot tightened in my stomach. "Tell me." She held up her phone. "Before you arrived?" They were filming. A cold spread through my spine, filming what everything she said. "Your mother narrated the situation like she was recording evidence. Your father added commentary. It was not documentation, it was rehearsal." Of course it was. Image has always been my mother's first language. "They planned the scene," I murmured. Rebecca nodded. "They expected you to lose your temper on camera. They wanted material to twist." Henry shook his head. "They did not get it. You stayed calm." Maybe I did, but they had still extracted a spectacle one they would reshape until it fit whatever narrative they needed. I returned upstairs to a home that suddenly felt different. The air was the same, the soft coastal breeze still pressed against the balcony doors, but something in me had been scraped raw. Fear hummed beneath my skin, but another feeling rose with it, something sharper, steadier. My phone buzzed. "Mother, you embarrassed your father." Another message. "You treated us like outsiders." A third. Everyone in the building was watching. Do you know how humiliating that was? I exhaled slowly. Her outrage had nothing to do with legality trespassing or the fact that they had tried to sell my apartment. What offended her was losing control of her narrative. More messages followed, each one sharpened like a needle. "You undermined us in front of a professional. You are not ready for responsibility." I set my phone face down. Humiliation had always been her favorite weapon. For years it worked. It made me small. It made me apologetic. It made me bend. Not this time. I gripped the counter until my hands steadied, replaying their accusations in my head, and then my own voice cutting through them. I own this home. The truth did not tremble. My phone buzzed again. Eric, Mom is crying. Everyone saw you yelling. I did not yell. I typed. His response was immediate. People heard what they heard. No, I thought. They heard what she told them to hear. Within minutes, the message spread. Aunt Susan. Why would you attack your parents? Cousin Melissa, your mom says you screamed. You need to fix this. A family friend. Your parents only wanted to help. Apologize. I stared at the screen as the realization crystallized. My mother had already rewritten the entire event. She struck first, claimed the wound, and cast me as the aggressor. This was not miscommunication. It was a strategy, polished, rehearsed, inherited. An hour later, Kayla let herself into my apartment without knocking. One look at my face and she wrapped her arms around me. They flipped the story, did they not, she said. They told everyone I humiliated them, I whispered, that I caused a scene. Kayla stepped back, jaw tightening. Of course they did. They cannot afford to be the villains in their own narrative. It is spreading fast, I said. People are choosing their version. Let them choose, she replied. Noise dies. Facts stay. You keep your proof. You protect your home. Another buzz. My father this time. Today's behavior proves you are unstable. Our lawyer will be in contact. The room felt colder. Kayla glanced at the message, her expression darkening. They are panicking. This is what desperation looks like. I hate that it became this ugly, I whispered. It did not become ugly today, she said gently. It has been ugly for a long time. You are simply not absorbing it in silence anymore. Her words settled inside me like a truth I had always known but never embraced. By evening, the messages stopped. A calculated silence took their place, the kind that comes right before another strike. I stepped onto the balcony, letting the coastal wind sting my cheeks. The city lights shimmered against the water, indifferent and steady. My parents were convinced pressure would tame me. They counted on gossip doing the work they could not. They expected their narrative to eclipse the truth. But as their tactics escalated, something steadied inside me, a quiet, sharp certainty. Panic did not rise. Shame did not return. Old habits did not reclaim me. Instead, a boundary formed where there had never been one. When they reached for the home I built alone, they unintentionally showed me the exact line I would defend without hesitation. Nothing in me broke that day. What emerged was the version of myself they never expected to meet. I woke up the next morning with a dull ache behind my eyes, the kind that comes from holding in anger for too long. My phone was mercifully silent, though I suspected it was only because my family was regrouping behind the scenes. People like my mother did not retreat. They recalculated. I moved through the morning, quietly sipping coffee on the balcony, while the sound of waves crashed below. My apartment felt like both a sanctuary and a battleground. Somewhere beneath the exhaustion, a stubborn flame burned. What they wanted was out of reach now. The home born from years of double shifts was not theirs to touch, and the future I was finally shaping belonged entirely to me. Around 9:00 a.m., the doorbell rang. I froze. Kayla had a key. No one else visited without warning. I checked the peephole and exhaled shakily. It was Liam. He stood there in dark jeans, a crisp button-down shirt, and an expression that blended concern with determination. I opened the door. "Elena," he said softly, "I heard what happened." I blinked. "How?" He lifted his phone. "The building group chat is in chaos." I groaned, covering my face briefly. Of course. Residents had witnessed yesterday's spectacle, and gossip was its own wildfire. "Before you worry," he added quickly, "most people are on your side." I lowered my hand. "Seriously, your parents were dramatic," he said carefully. People could tell something was off. A wave of relief hit me harder than expected. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. When the door closed, Liam turned to face me fully. "Elena." "I am not just here because of yesterday," he said. "I am here because something came across my desk this morning." I stiffened. "What do you mean?" He reached into his bag and pulled out a thin file. "This," he said, handing it to me, "is a copy of an inquiry your parents made to a real estate office downtown." Confusion flickered through me. "An inquiry for what?" "For verification of ownership of your unit," he said. "They tried to present themselves as the decision-makers." My breath caught. "They—" "What?" He nodded. "They said they were acting on behalf of the Carter family estate. The office did not move forward because something seemed inconsistent, but they did run a preliminary verification." My pulse hammered in my ears. "They had no right," I whispered. "I know," Liam said, "which is why I asked the office manager to flag your property. No one can initiate anything without direct contact from you." I sank into a chair, emotions swirling: rage, fear, gratitude, disbelief. "Thank you," I breathed. Liam took the seat across from me. "I want to help you, Elena, not just as your realtor, but as someone who cares about what happens to you." His sincerity struck something tender inside me that I did not have the strength to deflect. Before I could reply, another knock echoed through the apartment. Liam and I exchanged a look. "That is either Kayla," I whispered, "or the next chapter of hell." I checked the peephole again. Oh God, what Liam asked. "It is my parents," I said. "And Eric." Liam rose calmly. "Do you want me to stay?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. I opened the door a crack. My mother pushed against it, immediately forcing her way inside. "Elena, we are having a conversation," she declared, as if she owned the space she was barging into. My father followed, stiff with anger. Eric stood behind them, avoiding my eyes. Liam stepped forward, placing himself subtly between me and my parents. "Good morning," he said smoothly. "This is a private residence. You were not invited." My mother glared at him. "And who exactly are you?" "This is a family matter. I am Elena's real estate agent," Liam said, his tone unwavering. "And I am here because your behavior yesterday raised legitimate legal concerns." My father scoffed loudly. "Legal concerns?" "Please, this is our daughter. We have every right to discuss family property." Liam did not flinch. "Except this is not family property." He walked to the kitchen counter, picked up the file he brought, and held it up. "Your daughter is the sole legal owner of this home. Your attempts to claim authority over it have been documented." My mother stiffened, her mask cracking for a split second. "I do not know what paperwork you think you have," she snapped, "but we have already spoken to several people who confirmed this apartment was purchased with Carter family funds." "No," Liam said calmly. "It was purchased by Elena, with her savings, with her mortgage, with her documented bank transfers." He turned to me. "Elena, do you have your deed?" I nodded slowly and retrieved the binder from my office. My hands trembled as I handed the document to him. Liam opened it, faced my parents, and tapped the first page. "Look, read, understand." My mother snatched it, scanned the paper, and her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. My father's face went red. "This means nothing," my mother spat. "This house exists because of the Carter family legacy. Money flows through generations. Elena owes her family everything." "No," I said quietly but firmly. "I owe you nothing." Her head whipped toward me. "Excuse me, I bought this place on my own," I said. "I worked 2 jobs for years. I did this by myself." My father stepped forward. "Do not disrespect your mother." Liam stepped closer to me again, his voice steady. "She is not disrespecting anyone. She is stating facts." My father turned on him. "You need to leave. This does not concern you." "It concerns me when you attempt to commit real estate fraud," Liam countered. Eric finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, Dad, maybe we should leave." My mother rounded on him. "Do not you dare take her side." He flinched, but did not speak again. Liam took a breath, opened another folder, and pulled out a printed email. "This," he said, "is a confirmation from the downtown real estate office that you attempted to present yourselves as authorized sellers. That inquiry is now flagged as suspicious. Any further attempts will result in a mandatory fraud report." My parents both froze. Liam lowered the paper. His voice was calm but razor sharp. "If you continue interfering with Elena's property, you may face legal consequences." My mother shook her head repeatedly, almost like she was trying to physically shake off reality. "No," she whispered. "No. We are her parents. She does not do this to us. She does not betray family. She is not betraying anyone," Liam said firmly. "You are." Silence hung thick in the air. My mother broke it with a hiss. "You will regret this, Elena. You think your little realtor boyfriend can protect you. You are still part of this family whether you like it or not, and family always wins." I stepped forward. "No," I said, my voice steady and stronger than I felt. "Family does not win. Truth does. Ownership does. And the law does." My father yanked my mother toward the door, his jaw clenched. "Come on," he muttered. "We are leaving." They shoved past Liam, past me, past the truth. Eric lingered in the doorway, eyes downcast. "Elena," he whispered, "I am sorry." Then he followed them out. The door shut with a hollow final echo. I exhaled shakily. Liam stepped closer, voice soft. "You did incredibly well." I wiped my eyes. I was terrified. He shook his head. "But you did not back down." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something like hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were beginning to turn, and for the first time I was the one rewriting the narrative. The storm arrived 3 days after my parents appeared at my apartment, and it had nothing to do with the sky. Outside the weather was calm, but inside my building, tension wound itself tight as if waiting to snap. I should have sensed it coming. People like my mother did not accept boundaries. They bided their time and struck when they thought your guard was down. Saturday morning began quietly. I was whisking batter for lemon ricotta pancakes, enjoying the rare stillness. Vanilla and citrus drifted through the kitchen, giving me the illusion of normalcy. Then my phone rang. It was Henry, the building manager. "Elena," he said without preamble, "are you at home?" "Yes," I answered. "What is going on?" "There is a situation in the lobby. I suggest you stay in your unit." My breath caught. "A situation with who?" He hesitated. "Your family." The whisk slipped from my hand, batter splattering across the counter. "What are they doing now?" I asked. Henry exhaled in frustration. "Your parents and your brother arrived with a moving crew. They are claiming you are unwell and insisting you need to be relocated immediately. They attempted to access your floor." A cold shock ran through me. "You are serious?" "Unfortunately, yes. They tried using your last name as an excuse for emergency entry. I refused and called security. Anger and adrenaline surged through me. "Do not let them anywhere near my hallway." "They will not get close," he assured me, "but if you want their statements documented, you should come downstairs." I grabbed my deed identification and the security footage Liam had helped me save. If they were going to escalate, I would meet them prepared. When the elevator doors opened, the lobby erupted in noise. My mother's voice ricocheted across the room. "She is not stable. We need to move her before something happens," my father added. "This is for her own good. She cannot be living here alone. We are taking back the family property." Residents had gathered. Security watched closely. The moving crew looked deeply uncomfortable. Eric spotted me first. "She is right there," he murmured. "Mom, maybe we should not." My mother spun toward me, eyes blazing. "Elena, thank goodness. Come with us. Pack your things." Whispers swept through the lobby. I stepped forward, keeping my tone even. "I am fine. You need to leave." The pleasant expression on my mother's face vanished. "Elena, stop embarrassing us. We explained everything already." Henry stepped beside me. "No, you did not. You attempted to enter private property without approval." My father glared at him. "That is our daughter. Her affairs are our responsibility." Henry's voice sharpened. "Her residence is legally hers. You have no authority here." My mother lifted a hand to her chest in dramatic offense. "How dare you speak to us that way?" I opened my folder. "I am an adult, and this is my deed, my mortgage, and every document proving ownership." A ripple of astonishment spread through the crowd. My mother sneered. "This is not a courtroom." "It might become one," I said, "especially after your latest attempt to take control of my home." She blinked rapidly. "What attempt?" I looked at Henry. "May I?" He nodded. I played the video from my front door camera, my parents claiming ownership. demanding entry, insisting the apartment belonged to them. Their own voices filled the lobby. When it ended, my mother lunged toward me. "Elena, stop this. Delete it." I stepped back. "No, this is evidence." My father's voice trembled with rage. "You are turning against your family." "I am stepping away from what has been hurting me for years," I said quietly. A thick silence settled. One of the movers cleared his throat. "So, are we canceling the job?" Both of my parents shouted. "Yes," my mother snapped at him. "Stay out of our business." The mover held up his hands. "We were hired to pack boxes, not get pulled into a family meltdown." Someone snickered. My mother spun toward the sound. "This is serious. We are trying to save our daughter." I crossed my arms. The only danger in my life right now is standing in front of me. My father stepped closer, jaw tense. "We are your parents. What we say stands." Henry intervened instantly. "Not here. Not today." Security approached. "Sir, ma'am, one officer said you are creating a disturbance. If you do not leave voluntarily, we will escort you out." My mother gasped dramatically. "Escort us! We are the ones being mistreated." Eric finally snapped. "Mom! Dad, stop! This is not helping. None of this is helping." My mother turned on him. "Do not you dare take her side." The dam broke. "Enough," he shouted. "I cannot do this anymore. I am tired of being part of your plans. I am tired of lying to protect you." The lobby went still. Eric turned to me, voice unsteady. "Elena, I knew what they were planning. They promised to help me with my business if I supported them." My mother lunged again. Eric stopped talking. He did not. They were not doing this for me. They were doing it to control both of us. The truth dropped like a stone. My mother's face contorted not with regret, but with humiliation. "You ungrateful child," she whispered. "Everything we did was for you." Eric shook his head. "You built expectations, not support." Security stepped forward again. "It is time to go." My father grabbed my mother's arm. This time, she did not fight. They walked out rigidly, fury and shame burning through them. Eric lingered. "Elena, I am sorry. Truly. We can talk later," I said softly. He nodded and followed them out. The doors closed behind them, and the lobby released a collective breath. Henry turned to me. "I will file the incident report and update your security protocols. They will not get close to this unit again." Relief hit me so hard my knees weakened. "Thank you." Moments later, Liam entered the lobby scanning for me. "Elena," he called. "Are you all right?" The moment I heard his voice, the tension inside me cracked. He reached me in 2 steps, steadying me with a hand on my back. "I am here," he said. "You are safe." For the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe him. My family had tried to force their way into my home, rewrite the truth, and paint me as unstable. But the truth stood firm, and this time everyone witnessed it. The silence in my apartment the morning after everything collapsed felt different. It was not empty the way it had once felt when I moved in, still carrying childhood guilt and unspoken rules on my back. This silence felt earned. It felt like the calm that followed a storm that had finally spent itself. I stood by the kitchen island, sipping coffee, watching pale winter lights spill across my living room. I could breathe without bracing for the next phone call or the next intrusion. For the first time in my life, I felt like the adult I had worked so hard to become. My doorbell rang at 9 in the morning. I hesitated before answering, but the hallway camera showed Eric standing there alone, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, shoulders tight. I opened the door slowly. "Elena," he said, not looking up. "Can I talk for a minute?" I nodded and stepped aside. He hovered just inside the doorway like the space might reject him. His eyes were tired and swollen. He looked smaller than I remembered. "I know this does not make anything right," he began, "but I wanted to say it in person. Everything that happened at the building, it was wrong. What Mom and Dad did was wrong, and what I did was worse." He sat on the edge of my couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "I knew they were planning something," he continued. "I did not know how far they would take it, but I knew enough. I should have warned you. I should have said something." I leaned against the counter. "Why did you stay quiet?" He drew a shaky breath. Because I was desperate, and they knew it. His voice cracked. My business is failing, Elena. I have been hiding it for months. I did not want to tell you because I did not want to look like a failure next to you. Mom kept saying that if I helped them, they would help me, that I was doing the right thing for the family, and I wanted to believe that. He rubbed his face exhausted. But I saw you yesterday. I saw what they were willing to do to you, and I realized they have been using us both. I sat across from him. Eric, I am not angry at you for being in trouble. I am angry because you chose them over me when you knew what they were doing. I watched his face searching for the habitual performance, but found only raw, exhausted honesty. The shame was real, not weaponized. He nodded slowly. I know, and I regret it more than you know. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something I never expected. I am cutting ties with them. I blinked. Are you serious? I paused, allowing the weight of that statement, the true cost of his confession, to settle in the air. Yes, I am getting therapy. I already canceled the joint account Mom set up. I blocked Dad's number last night. I am moving out of their house by the end of the month. I cannot keep living like this. I studied him carefully. For the first time in years, he looked honest. If you really mean that, I said, then it is a start. He exhaled shakily, relief flooding his expression. I do mean it, and I am sorry, truly. He stood, hesitated, then asked quietly, Can we rebuild? Eventually we can try, I said, but things will be different. He nodded. Different is good. He left a few minutes later, and when the door closed behind him, I felt something inside me settle. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. A possibility I had never allowed myself before. Later that afternoon, I opened a letter from the Homeowners Association confirming new access rules. My parents' names were permanently added to the banned individuals list. Their building fobs were canceled. Any attempt to enter the property would result in immediate police involvement. The letter ended with, Your safety is our priority. Ms. Carter. I read it twice and set it aside, feeling something close to liberation. Boundaries that were once invisible had become concrete. Around 6 that evening, Liam arrived with takeout and his warm, steady presence. The moment he walked in, the tension in my shoulders melted. I brought dinner, he said, holding up 2 bags, and not a single thing requires cooking unless you want it to. I laughed softly. Food I do not have to prepare might be the greatest gift right now. We ate on my couch, legs tangled, quiet but comfortable. At one point, he brushed his thumb over the back of my hand. You know, he said gently, you handled yesterday better than anyone I have ever seen. You stood your ground. I did not feel strong, I admitted. I felt terrified. That is what makes it strong, he said. Doing it anyway. His voice made something warm bloom inside my chest. After dinner, we walked out onto the balcony. The winter air was crisp, the city glittering beneath us. I leaned against the railing. I spent years thinking I owed them everything I said. Every decision, every sacrifice, every piece of myself. They raised me to believe I existed for their convenience. I inhaled deeply, letting the cool, clean air fill the space where a knot of anxiety used to live. With Liam there, the air felt lighter, less demanding. And now Liam asked, Now I know I do not owe them anything except distance. He slipped his arm around my waist. I am proud of you. The words hit deeper than I expected. I turned to him, trying to smile but feeling my throat tighten. You were there, I whispered. You saw everything. And I would do it again, he said. 1,000 times. We stood there for a long time, the city humming beneath us, both of us breathing in the newness of what my life had become. Later that night, after Liam left, I walked through my apartment, slowly noticing it with fresh eyes. The soft glow of the kitchen lights. The rosemary plant I had kept alive through sheer stubbornness. The framed photos of meals I had created. My mixer sitting proudly on the counter, the one I had saved for during the busiest year of my life. This space was mine, truly mine. Not a family investment, not a temporary residence, not a placeholder for someone else's future. It was the result of 7 years of exhaustion over time, skipped holidays, and dreams I refused to bury. I had fought for it, and I had won. My phone buzzed once, a text from an unknown number. I am getting help. I am sorry for everything. I hope someday you will forgive me. Mom. I stared at the message, trying to decipher what it meant. A moment of clarity, manipulation, desperation. It was impossible to tell. I turned off my phone and placed it face down on the table. I did not need to respond. Not tonight. Instead, I lit a candle, brewed a cup of tea, and stood at my balcony window, watching the city lights flicker like a quiet promise. A promise of the life I would live now, not under anyone's control, not carrying anyone's guilt, not sacrificing myself for someone else's entitlement. For the first time in 29 years, I felt like the story of my life belonged to me. And I was just getting started. I woke on Sunday to sunlight settling across my sheets, warm and unhurried, as if the world had finally stopped pushing against me. For the first time in months, my chest felt open. No tension buzzing beneath my skin, no weight pressing under my ribs, no fear that a knock on my door would drag me back into chaos. The apartment was quiet, still, entirely mine. I moved through the morning without rushing, brewing coffee, whisking eggs, slicing strawberries. Each small motion felt grounded. My kitchen had always been the place where I found my balance, but now it felt like a sanctuary fully restored. After breakfast, I settled at the dining table with a legal pad and began writing notes for David. The restraining order was in process, and he needed timelines, details, and supporting documents. Instead of feeling drained, I felt steady. Every line I wrote was a declaration that I was done living in reaction to my parents. I was building structure, stability, and distance. By noon, the apartment smelled of vanilla and warm sugar. I had baked maple pecan cookies and boxed half of them for Henry and the front desk team. As I tied the ribbon, a quiet gratitude rose in me. It felt good to give something without losing anything in return. The lobby was calm when I stepped out of the elevator. Henry was behind the desk, typing. He looked up as I approached. "These are for all of you," I said, sliding the box toward him. His eyebrows lifted. "Really? For everything you did?" He glanced at the cookies. "You know you handled the hardest part, right?" "Maybe," I said, "but I did not do it alone." He nodded, his expression warm. "Your parents will not get near this building again. The entire staff knows what happened. I appreciate that. You are safe here now." For the first time, I felt the truth in those words. On my way back upstairs, I ran into Monica, the neighbor who lived 2 doors down. She held a grocery bag and hesitated before speaking. "Hey," she said gently, "I hope this does not overstep, but are you all right? Yesterday seemed rough." I let out a slow breath. "I am doing better today. If you ever need anything, I am right next door." No judgment, no gossip. The sincerity in her voice surprised me. "Thank you. That means more than you know." People had seen what happened, but they had also seen me stand my ground. Somehow that changed the atmosphere around me. I no longer felt like the quiet woman who kept to herself. I felt like someone who had finally taken up her own space. Back in my apartment, I spent the afternoon reorganizing my pantry, labeling jars, filling containers, restoring order. I played soft music, the kind that made the room feel warm and lived in. Each small task felt like reclaiming something I had lost during the chaos, stability, calm, a sense of home. Around 4, Liam arrived with a bag of groceries and a careful smile. "Do you need help with anything today?" he asked, stepping inside like he was entering a space he respected. I smiled. "You can help by tasting things." He laughed and placed the groceries on the counter, fresh herbs, lemons, a loaf of sourdough. He navigated my kitchen with ease, but always paused long enough for me to guide him. Not assuming, not taking over, simply there. We cooked together, chopping vegetables and stirring sauces. I leaned against the counter as he whisked a vinaigrette. For the first time in a long time, my future felt like something I could shape, not something I had to protect from someone else. After dinner, we settled on the couch with blankets and tea. The city lights glowed through the windows. "There is something I want to say," Liam murmured. "Watching you stand up for yourself yesterday, it made something clear to me." I met his gaze. "You have carried burdens you never should have carried," he continued. "You deserve someone who does not add to that, someone who makes life feel easier, not heavier." Warmth spread through my chest. "I would like to be that person," he said. "Only if it is what you want, and only at your pace." My answer came softly but sure. "I want that." Slowly. His expression softened. Then slow work for me. We stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in the quiet that comes when nothing needs to be proven. Later, after he left, I stepped onto the balcony alone. The evening air carried the scent of the sea. I held the railing and looked out at the same city that had witnessed every late shift, every exhausted morning, every small victory that had brought me here. "This is my life," I whispered. It felt true in a way it never had before. My phone buzzed. "A message from Kayla, proud of you. Dinner soon. I want updates." Another notification arrived, David, confirming the next legal steps and protection measures. I sent a brief reply and set my phone aside. I turned off the lights and let the moon illuminate the apartment. Everything was exactly where it belonged. Quiet, clear, mine. For the first time in 29 years, I was not holding my breath for the next demand or expectation. I was not shrinking to make anyone comfortable. I was not waiting for permission to exist. I slid into bed, the room humming with the soft sounds of the city. Before I switched off the lamp, the words rose without effort, steady and certain. "I am free."